Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're talking about the House of Penhaligons. It's been a while since I've done a video that really goes in depth on an individual perfume house, and I've been waiting a while to find one that's interesting enough to talk about. And lately I've been revisiting some of my older Penhaligons bottles that, if you've watched enough of my videos in this recent season, you've noticed they're just like right there, just right there. And I have to admit, kind of ignored my Penhaligons fragrances for a long time. I was recently telling someone that one of them in my collection I hadn't touched for 7 whole years. Like, last recorded wearing on base notes was June or July 2018, and I didn't touch it until very recently, past few days. So yeah, 7 years sitting in my collection. Typically, I've had fragrances for less time than that I've moved on if I haven't touched. I've already told you about how I look and see the frequency of use, and if something sits for that long, it has to go, because at that point I'm basically burning out what's left of my lifespan with a bottle that's not being enjoyed. So, but with the Penhaligons fragrances, I kind of made a bit of an exception. I know I hadn't touched them in years, and I've gotten a lot older and grayer and fatter in some cases since the last time I wore one of them. But on the very same token, I kept them because I knew I could never have them again. And as I begin talking about this house, I'll explain why it is that I could never have these fragrances again in some cases. So, but before we get into that, let's start at the beginning. Penhaligons, what are they? Well, Penhaligons is, or at least was, one of the more renowned barber-based perfuming brands coming out of London. So, perfume culture varies by country to country, region to region, and with France and Paris, a lot of the big notable perfume makers like Guerlain and Caron, Houbigant, and so forth, a lot of them started life as candle makers, soap makers, or makers of small leather goods, which also involve the use of scent. So that is where the French perfume scene really evolved. They evolved out of these other sundries, basically. But in the UK, specifically in and around London, a lot of perfumers evolved out of barbers. Now there was one French barber who became a perfumer, and it's Edward Pinot, very famously from House Pinot. But this phenomenon was much more common in London, and the reason being, London was kind of a hotspot for the barber industry anyway. There were lots of barbers, lots of English gentlemen during the height of dandy fashions. They liked to wear the stovepipe hats, and they loved to have the very trimmed mustaches and beards and such, and very well defined shapes on their faces. And most guys were not going to do that themselves. It was very dangerous. So they would just pay a barber to do it, which means poor people had long beards, obviously. You had to be someone well heeled to have a trimmed face, So, but that's how life was, and it remained that way all through the 17 into the 1800s, really, as shaving your face was kind of a luxury, just as cutting your hair was kind of a luxury. So having it styled, even more of a luxury. But these well-heeled aristocratic gentlemen, these society elite in London, also liked smelling good. after a haircut, after a shave. And a lot of the tonics they put in their hair, the things they put on their face after a shave to soothe it, disinfect it, and calm it, a lot of those things would be scented. Okay? And so obviously that evolved to, well, hey, let's make the fragrances in a standalone, usable type of format. A cologne, more likely than not, because colognes were still kind of the de rigueur for most Western fragrances. We hadn't gotten into perfumes, eau de parfums, and all that stuff just yet. That would come a little later. That would come at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th. But one of the preeminent barbers who went into perfumery from the barber profession was William Penhaligon. And William Penhaligon got his start without a proper barbershop. He would be a traveling barber. He would have all his stuff in a case and go from place to place and set up. And one of the places he liked to set up in were Turkish bathhouses, which were very popular in Victorian England, specifically in Victorian London. A lot of guys loved going into these Turkish bathhouses, big in-ground, tiled, basically pools, swimming pools full of hot water with fountains and steam rooms and massage tables and all that lovely stuff. And usually the scent of rose and sandalwood, because they're vibing off the whole Turkish culture, right? Persian culture in general. So they have to emulate that, since we're also talking about the Victorian era where Orientalism was in full swing. So anything from the Far East, anywhere from China to the Middle East, all that stuff, all the iconography, all the art, all the fashion, the smells, the looks, all of it was very high desire stuff for the well-heeled people in London. So, the fans and such, they just loved that stuff. The prints for the walls and everything. So obviously, Turkish baths were a place to be. And one particular Turkish bath was on Jermyn Street, and that ended up being the same street where William Penhaligon, upon having a lot of success as a barber, would open his first barbershop. So, by that point, he had become quite proficient at making smells. When he transitioned from being in the bathhouse to having his own shop, he made his first scented product that was really paying homage to his origins, called Hammam Bouquet, released in 1872. And it was designed to replicate the smell of those bathhouses, those hammams. Now, that product became very popular. And obviously, suddenly, Penhaligons became a going concern. And there were already other perfume establishments, because London and UK in general has a very rich perfume history. Some people like to focus so hard on the French that they forget. And I kind of get irritated by this. They forget that there's a lot of perfume history in England in general, in Britain. So don't let the French steal all the glory, okay? Floris, Penhaligon, the Crown Perfumery, rest in peace. G.O.F. Trumper, okay, D.R. Harris. Later brands that weren't around necessarily back then, but later brands would come around, like Taylor Bold Bond Street, True Fit and Hill, Sheck and Speak, and even more recent than that, brands within the last 20, 30 years, like Murdoch of London is a more recent brand. And of course, you could say Roja Dove also can be included in that, because he's a UK-based brand as well, even though he kind of really emulates the French style more than anything else. But he counts. Okay, he gets invited to this particular tea party for once. He gets invited. So old Roger Bird can show up, get his cup of tea, sit with the other perfume houses. So the thing is, you'll notice that a lot of these brands I mentioned, D.R. Harris Apothecary, okay, G.O.F. Trumper, also a barbershop, okay. Very few of them are standalone perfumers. Floris is a standalone perfumer, but they're one of the few. A lot of these British brands come from some pragmatic or practical service first, you know. Pharmacy, druggist, apothecary, barber, okay? That's what I'm trying to say here. Different angle than the French. The French, a lot of the French glove makers, like I said, candle makers, soap makers, stuff like that. A little more adjacent to perfume. So, but it's cool because it means that the British fragrances tend to hit different, and they do because of their practical origins. All right. Now, what made Penhaligon special for a long time was he broke a lot of rules. He didn't follow conventions set down by the French. He didn't always follow even older conventions set by Arabian perfumery, like the interest in amber, like the interest in heavy rose perfume. He did things sort of unorthodox. And there are a lot of things that got lost to time that would later be reissued by the brand, like Zizonia and stuff like Eau Sans Péré and stuff like that. And a lot of these things that he created in the earlier period of his career, they didn't really follow chypre structures. They didn't follow the amber oriental structures. Hammam Bouquet was pretty on the nose. Obviously, it was designed to smell like a Turkish bath. But a lot of the other stuff was just kind of him using his imagination and doing whatever he wanted. And that made Penhaligon's a bit special. You know, in particular, the turn of the 20th century, all right. So now we are talking about the Edwardian era, basically. And he created a fragrance for the Duke of Marlborough called Blended Bouquet. And the thing about it is, you wouldn't really think these days that there's anything special about it, because now it's a very well-covered trope. But back when this came out, at the very turn of the 20th century, it defied convention, because a lot of men's fragrances were focused on florals, were focused on things like narrowly, had musks in them. Hammam Bouquet is a good example of that. Smell any of the Jockey Club fragrances that were very popular in the 19th century. They were all very floral and musky as well. So Blended Bouquet comes out, and it's basically just citrus, pine, cedar, and pepper. That's it. Very basic, very sharp, very austere, which is, you know, properly British, some may say. But the fact that it was such a deviation from what was really expected back then, you know, it really just, because of Blended Bouquet, because of this English fragrance, we would get a lot of Italian fragrances that would copy this style, okay? You smell this, and it's not too far removed from a Aqua de Silva, not too far removed from a Pinot Silvestre. Even the Spanish would kind of take to this style. Agua Brava by Puig, who would end up owning this house in later years. There's some twisted irony in there, but the whole idea of the dry, citrus, woody pepper theme that a lot of other countries and brands in general would just run with take it like a rugby ball. We can't say a football because we're talking English brand, so rugby ball and run with it. It's kind of what they did. But it all starts right here. This is the first. This walked so Pinot Silvestri could run, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. And it was rumored that Winston Churchill loved this stuff a lot too. It was commissioned for a duke, but ended up becoming the favorite of Winston Churchill in later years. And there are royal warrants for this. So there's the Princess of Wales on here, and the Duke of Edinburgh would give Penhaligons a royal warrant as well to produce toiletries for his house. But before that, we would see the brand generally become a public institution. It became very popular amongst just the common people. And there were a lot of common people in London. Nowadays, London is all just rich foreign investors. There's very few actual English people that can afford to live in London these days. It's kind of sad. But London's kind of become the New York of Europe, really. It's what it is. So, a place for rich folks to fly into, spend money, make money, and then fly out of. But it wasn't always like that. So, yeah, Penhaligons was kind of a brand of the people, right? You wouldn't know it now by the direction they've taken, but they were a brand of the people. Unfortunately, World War II happened, and the original German street shop was destroyed in the Blitz. 1941 was destroyed in the Blitz. That was kind of the end of Penhaligons. William Penhaligon by that point was old anyway. If he was even still alive, he was old. So there was just no Penhaligon perfumes, basically. There was another shop that survived, but I think that was a barber shop. I don't think they made perfumes there. Or if they did make perfumes, they were just made basically to sell right there in that one shop to the customers who came in there and got their haircuts. So eventually what happened was GOF Trumper, who is a competing brand, I think GOF Trumper has had more consistent fragrances and a longer history of fragrances. By that point, GOF Trumper was more popular than Penhaligons. GOF Trumper came in and bought the brand, and they basically moved manufacture of the few Penhaligons that were still being made into their basement. So imagine like your competitor is making your surviving fragrances in their basement. That's how little they really cared. It's kind of sad. They became an obscure sub-label, effectively, of GF Trumper. But then fast forward to the 1970s, and a woman named Sheila Pickles, who had very well-heeled friends, had a lot of money. She bought the Penhaligons brand from GOF Trumper, and she opened a new store in, I think, Covent Gardens? I think it's Covent Gardens. Yeah, it's Covent Garden. Yeah, she opened a new boutique in Covent Garden, kind of restarted Penhaligons. And by 1978, they were maybe not back to where they were in the early 20th century, but they were definitely back. She made some new fragrances like Night Scented Stocking and Bluebell and a couple others. English Rose, I think, was one that was made under the Sheila Pickles era. Also reissued a couple of things like Lords, which eventually became Doro, which is up there. And then I think Raquette's Club, the original Raquette's Club, was a Sheila Pickles fragrance. It was a fougere, very nice fougere. Speaking of which, English Fern by Penhaligons from 1911 discontinued, one of their most classic fragrances, and they don't even make it anymore. Like I said, we'll get to the travesty of the brand in a second, but Penhaligons kind of built themselves back up, and they became an esteemed and beloved English perfume brand, right? They sat head and shoulders with brands like Florist, like I said. But I don't know what kind of happened, but at some point, someone had to make a fast buck, I guess, and the brand was sort of pump and dumped over to the Puig Group, you know, Antonio Puig, who owns a lot of designer brands. And when Puig got their hands on Penhaligons, they decided to just slowly twist and contort the brand away from its traditional English roots, its English style of perfumery based on barber conventions and all that. And they moved them into basically the same luxury niche kind of claptrap that so many other brands have, like Xerjoff, you know, like I've mentioned them already. It just didn't make sense, but that's what they wanted to do. It didn't happen overnight though. You know, they kept a lot of the old fragrances at first. Castile, English Fern, you know, kept the stuff on the market for a while. Zizonia, which they brought back, kept the stuff around, but then eventually began phasing out the classics one by one. They even got rid of Hammam Bouquet, the literal first fragrance, the literal historical fragrance that put the brand on the map, and they fucking got rid of it because they just don't give a fuck about what Penhaligons is or what it's supposed to be. They don't care. You know, it's almost as sad as what happened to the Crown Perfumery, what Clive Christian did, but that's a subject for another video. I won't get into that right now. But suffice it to say, they basically just dismantled Penhaligons for parts and built up a whole new, shallow, kind of tacky brand around it. Granted, there have been some fragrances that have come out during the Puig era that were really good. Elixir was really good. Olivia Giacobetti made that one, discontinued, unfortunately. Halfetti is pretty good, but that one costs an arm and a leg, and I can't afford it. And what's really sad is these fragrances used to retail around $125, $150, which is a lot more than a designer was at that time. They were talking $95 for a designer. So it was a bit more upscale from a designer, but they were still attainable. You could buy them at places like the Art of Shaving, which those are gone now too, by the way. But they had a strong market presence until they didn't. Because Puig, like I said, kind of scrubbed them of all of their English barbershop heritage and just began making one just sort of weird, sweet, opulent, trendy kind of designer adjacent luxury niche thing after another. And then they started this whole character portraits line, and the portraits line is these stupid fragrances that have these stupid names based around these characters. Like, I don't even know the actual names of any of them because they're so stupid. I just call them stuff like the Precocious Mr. Peanut and the Curious George and stuff like that, right? Because it's what it is. Okay, it's Penny the Popsicle Pusher. That's another one they have. I don't fucking know. I don't care. So it's just dumb. They're just dumb. Okay, that's all there is to it. And it's like they've become a joke. They've become a caricature now. They're $300 plus, and they're the kind of fragrances that get sold to tourists who've never been to London before. Granted, I've never been to London. I probably never will get to London. I don't have the money to travel abroad. But like your typical stupid bubblegum chewing, here's my hat, right? I'm taking pictures. That's the kind of person that's going to buy one of these now. Just some rich, detached, look, y'all, I'm in London. Let me go have a meat pie, okay? Let me go drink an ale. That's the kind of person that's going to buy one of these. They don't really have any actual frame of reference for English culture or any respect for it, you know? So they're going to be like, ha ha ha, look, bangers and mash, ha 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 ha. Dude, bangers and mash is delicious. What the fuck you talking about? You know? Don't hate until you participate, my friend. Okay? So, it's just my thing. And I think it's a shame. Now, I've spent this much of the video going over the history and talking about what's happened to the brand. Let's talk about a few of my favorites. Some of them are discontinued, like I said. But the ones I do have and why I think they're great. So, starting with Bouquet from 1872, there just really is no fragrance like this. You want a piece of perfume history. You want to smell like a proper 19th century dandy with your frock and your walking cane and your mutton chop sideburns and your connected mustache and all of that stuff. You know, you want to feel like you're walking under a gas lamp, okay, on the cobblestones, on your way back from the high society function. You were dancing a waltz while holding candles, seeing if you can dance smoothly enough so that they don't blow out. If that's your deal, that's your bag, this is what you want. It's very musty, sandalwood and rose with a little bit of lavender, dry citruses. Yeah, it is not a pretty fragrance, but most fragrances back then weren't pretty because we didn't have synthetic musks, we didn't have ambroxan, didn't have any of that stuff. So they had to use animal musks, and they're not pretty. Is it a good perfume? Absolutely. Do you have to rearrange your mindset and get into the headspace of someone from back then to really enjoy it? Probably. Probably. But if you're the kind of person who likes ouds and all that sort of thing in 2025, I don't see you really having a problem with this. Not really. Another one I really like is Doro, Eau de Portugal. This one I think originally came out in, I want to say probably, it came out after Blend and Bouquet, but I'm not sure when, 1911 maybe? But this is a very strict exercise in Cistus labdanum, aka rock rose. So if you don't like rock rose, Cistus labdanum, then you're not going to like this. I smell this, and I smell the great-grandfather of Yves Saint Laurent Pour Homme, YSL Pour Homme. If you like YSL Pour Homme, the original from 71, 72, this is the grandfather of that fragrance. Not as creamy, not as heavy as YSL Pour Homme, very similar scent profile. And it's fantastic. Obviously, I already discussed Blend and Bouquet, so I'm not going over that one again. But I will talk about Castile, a more recent fragrance. This came out in '96. This was right at the very end of the Sheila Pickles era, I guess, right before she got out. This is one of the absolute best, longest lasting, classic cologne style fragrances that you can buy. If you like orange blossom, neroli, bergamot, clean musks, you want that whole 4711 or Farina style of fragrance, but you want it to last all day. You want that cologne style, but you want it to go the distance. This has just the right combination of musks in the base that it takes that orange blossom smell and it just pushes it out into eternity. And I have no idea why they would discontinue such a gorgeous classic fragrance. I don't know, man. I don't know. And then you've got Endemian. This came out in, I think, 98 or 99. And this is another just great classic, sort of very properly English, aromatic. It's got lavender, it's got sage, it's got a little bit of leather in it. Has a sort of creaminess to it that makes it a good fall fragrance, makes it good for a little bit heavier, colder season. But it's not an oriental though. It's not heavy in amber. It's not super vanillic. A little bit though, but not a lot. Perfectly well balanced and well suited. I get a good swig of sage and artemisia in this as well, and I love artemisia, so I automatically am all over this. There is a concentrate version, but you don't need it. You don't really need it. And then we've got Sartorial. I showed this off in a past video I did, a video about, proper gentleman fragrances. So I'm not going to really go at length on this one. You already know what it's about. This is the smell of Savile Row. This is the smell of a traditional English tailor. Cut and dried. That's it. The wood, the leather straps, the lavender, the hot pressed fabric, all of it. It's perfect. It is absolutely what you want to smell like if you want to pretend you're James Bond or in one of those Kingsman movies. If you want to smell like you're in that whole vibe, this has got you covered. Bertrand Duchefort created this in 2010, and you know he's a pretty creative guy. Done a lot of great niche fragrances. Did a really good job with this. That's it, guys. That's my video on Penhaligons. I really wish they would have another factory reset and go back to being a historical English perfume house that bases a lot of its stuff around the culture that it came up around. But it's not up to me. It's up to the billionaire ghoul overlords that control the brand now over at Puig, and they're going to keep turning it into a clown show until it stops making them money. It's just the way the world works these days. Thanks for watching. If you have any opinions on Penhaligons, you let me know. And